Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Co-host today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Today, Daniel, we have a very special guest, a friend of ours and a friend of Liberty. And he's had a lot of experience, a lot more than I had in the CIA. I was never in the CIA, but our guest was in the CIA for 18 years. He knows a lot about counterterrorism and military intelligence. And now he is writing about this and speaking out on it, and he has a wealth of knowledge on what's going wrong with our foreign policy. He is currently executive director of the Council for the National Interests, and that keeps him busy, but he does still a lot of writing for the various newspapers. I found it fascinating that he got a lot of education at the University of London a few years ago. He got a PhD and an MA degree, and his specialty was European history, and he's put it to good use. Phil Giraldi is his name, and Phil, I want to welcome you to the program today.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's my honor.
Wonderful. I want to start off with a generalized question that I'm always trying to figure out myself, and you may be able to help me. And then, of course, Daniel will be very much involved, too, in our discussion. But my question to you, Phil, is where do you think the most dangerous spot in the world is? Daniel and I spend a lot of time talking about the dangers, and sometimes we revisit Syria, revisit Iraq and the various things, and our government keeps us busy. We're always looking around. Some days it's Libya, who knows? But if you had to pick and choose, that if somebody should really concentrate where the hottest spot is, that the danger may explode to something that nobody is even thinking about.
Well, that's a complicated question. I mean, if we're looking at sheer danger, I would pick a place in Central Africa where the arms that we released from the Libyan arsenals wound up, and the institutions in those countries are not strong enough really to defend against that kind of insurgency. So those places are dangerous. But the most dangerous situation in the world today is the relationship between the United States and Russia.
Right. Okay, Daniel, go ahead.
Well, Phil, thanks so much for joining us. And as we've been doing these past few weeks, I would like to make an announcement before I start, and that is our September 10th Peace and Prosperity 2016 conference. I would like to announce that Phil Giraldi is going to be one of our featured speakers. So I know you're going to like what you hear. I know you've read probably a lot of you have read a lot of Phil's stuff. And we're so happy and we were so grateful, Phil, that you're going to join us. It's going to be a great conference, I think.
I think so too, Dan. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks. Now, the reason we wanted to chat, other than to make our big announcement, is that you did a real takedown of someone who is really putting his head up in a very neoconish way. You know, this is former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morell. He had a New York Times op-ed over the weekend with a very provocative title, "I ran the CIA, now I'm endorsing Hillary Clinton." And you took a look at that article, and today in the UN's review, you really slashed it to pieces, and it was quite a great job. But you know, the thing that I was thinking when I read Morell's article, and I read a couple of other pieces, and then I read yours, I'm wondering if you have noticed, and maybe it's just me, that it seems like senior military and intelligence professionals are getting much more overtly involved in electoral politics. Maybe it's not something new, but it seems like it to me. You certainly have, Morell for Clinton, General John Allen, USMC, four-star general, was actually a speaker at the DNC convention, and also General Flynn is definitely an advisor to Trump. Is this a new phenomenon? Is it just me, or is this something different?
Yeah, and I would add also Michael Hayden, former director of CIA, who has been criticizing Trump and is endorsing Hillary. Yeah, I think this is actually a new thing. It was a few years back. I think it would have been considered unseemly for a former senior official to come out in this kind of fashion, endorsing a politician, particularly as these former senior officials and generals tend to have a lot of baggage. They are people who have second careers. and very often these second careers are politically connected. So it's not exactly like they're objective sources of information. They tend to be in foundations where they're paid a lot of money, or they join Wall Street firms where they're paid a lot of money in terms of using their access to politicians and their former colleagues. So I think there were good reasons for them not to be opening their mouths, but lately they've gotten on the bandwagon, and I suspect they see some potential gain in the situation for themselves.
Well, and just as a follow-up on that, it seems also that the military-industrial complex is very, very broad, and you hear about that, and they're making a lot of profits when they do this. Along with these spokesmen in the media, it seems like there's so many experts out there and so much money to be made, and now it's political as well. It was we knew about the business and the military-industrial complex, but now it's moving into the political front, which I was telling Daniel, I don't think that separates them from the money. One of these guys like Morell, who gets I assume, like you've indicated in your article, that he's probably looking for a job. But when he gets a job, he probably doesn't lose any income, not on the long run. I imagine when he does his duty, for somebody like a Hillary, that he's compensated rather well.
Yeah, I think, we always forget the old principle of follow the money. And I think that these people, because they were generals or they were heads of CIA or they were senators, were somehow immune from that principle. They're not. And these people are looking out for themselves. You won't find too many of them out there who are saying, hey, all these wars have been a disaster for us. They're always pushing the line, which is that more war, more weapons, more spending is exactly what we should be doing. So that should confirm to everyone in their own minds that this is what it's all about. It's not really about national security.
Now, Phil, getting more into the meat of your critique of acting director Morell, this is something I think that is very telling. And we've been very, very critical of Donald Trump on the show, and Dr. Paul is very publicly critical of Trump. But there's something that Morell delves into that I would love to take your expertise. Probably the most incendiary claim in the article is that Trump is an unwitting Russian intelligence asset, recruited by the wily Putin to be his agent. And you pointed out, the dangerousness of this as a propaganda tool. But you also pointed out that Morell's career trajectory is a little different than yours, and you have an intimate insider's understanding of the operations side of the agency. Can you tell us exactly where he gets it wrong in this assessment?
Well, Morell basically was a guy who was tied to a desk for most of his career. He never ran agents. He was never a spy in a classic sense. So he doesn't really know what an agent is or how an agent relationship works. And so we have him describing someone as an unwitting agent for Russia, having been recruited by Russia's head of state. I mean, this is just utter nonsense. It doesn't make any sense if you're an agent being unwitting and both being an agent, meaning someone who is controlled by you. This is a contradiction in terms. So the fact is that criticizing Trump for being... Sorry.
A little background music.
we want you to start singing now.
I think that's Morell. Morell is after you now. You're done for.
Yeah, they would be. Well, let's get back to that. So Morell basically is contradictory in terms of what he's saying, and what he's saying is incendiary because he's accusing a candidate for the president of the United States of being a flunky or a lackey or even an agent for a foreign country. So this is an awful thing to be saying.
All right. Phil, I wanted to ask you a question about torture. I want to know whether or not you knew about it or came across it or experienced anything that was going on when you were in the CIA. The other thing is right now, if Morell goes with Clinton and Clinton wins, he's a pretty strong proponent. Then we have Trump. He's not bashful about it. He thinks torture is fine and even torture family members. So it's really, to me, such a horrible sign. But are things dramatically different? Are we really deteriorating? Or were things bad 25 years ago and we just didn't know about it?
Well, I would have to answer that by saying in my own experience, I saw torture once, and it was in Turkey. And when it occurred under strange circumstances, I was being detained by the Turkish police, and I was in what they had a foreigners' prison, and they were torturing foreigners. They were torturing Iranians, they were torturing Syrians, they were torturing Greeks, they were torturing. So I've seen it performed, but I was sort of in a confined position at the time, and there was nothing I could do about it, and I wasn't a participant. So I have seen it, and I think it's disgusting, and certainly there was a consensus in the CIA when I was there that torture was wrong. Now, this is being revised, obviously, because there are a lot of people who believe in it as a tool. But I think the evidence that torture works in a serious way, in other words, there will always be an instance that you can cite where somebody said something while being coerced, but the fact is torture as a practice does not work. And I think we have to get back to that.
Now, Phil, you wrote something in your article that I think captures a lot of what we've been trying to do for a long time. And I think it captures everything that's wrong with the national security state. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read you this couple of sentences, and maybe you can react and embellish a little bit. This is a quote from your article in today's UNS Review. Morell's career trajectory depends on there being major threats to the United States and requires him to be constantly searching for threats. You went on to discuss how that helps his bottom line, i.e. his financial state. If you can just embellish on that a little bit more.
Yeah, this is, again, let's go back and look for the money. Basically, these people are on careerist trajectories, and the careerist trajectory has nothing whatsoever to do with national security. It has a lot to do with how these people see themselves positioned 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So they are looking for people who will help their careers and people who will give them more money. And as a result, our whole system has been corrupted by this. There were a couple comments on my article today with people saying that what we need to do is lop off the upper levels. There's like a 7th floor at State Department, 7th floor at CIA, so probably a 7th floor at FBI. Lop all these levels off and get rid of all the politics and all the money. And that's, I think, an interesting conclusion.
Phil, I want to ask a question a little bit about strategy, since I was involved at one time in my life in politics and all. And I think everybody knows the terms that I use. I never liked the word isolationist, but I like to use the word non-interventionist, and I really believe in non-intervention, no entangling alliances, this sort of thing. A position that's not likely to come easily, but one that is stated clearly and knowing what the goals should be. But then we have some people who call themselves realists. They're the people who want to come across as more reasonable, but they still want more intervention. And then you have the neocons. Do you think that I lose, or people like myself lose, by being very, very strict and saying, let's just mind our own business and come home? Or do you have the temptation or the need, or do you take a position that might say, well, no, you got to be realistic about this, and sometimes we really need to get involved in these affairs of other nations?
Well, I think I consider myself a realist, but I think the ultimate realist has to concede the fact that the interventionism of the last 50 years has been our downfall. So, basically intervention itself is not a realistic policy. And I would say I don't reject the United States having a strong defense and being prepared to go to war if necessary. But I think if you look at the historical record, the last good war we fought was started in 1775. And that's the way I see it.
Phil, I'm going to go off the rails here just for a second. I can't help but ask you this. You You were stationed in Turkey. You speak Turkish. You follow Turkish affairs very closely. Today, if I'm not mistaken, Turkish President Erdogan is in St. Petersburg meeting with Putin. How significant is this meeting? Is it a shift in Turkish policy? And what do you see coming out of this meeting?
Well, I've been asked that a few times, as you can imagine. I think that this is a marriage of convenience. There are good economic reasons for Russia and Turkey to have at least a workable relationship. I'm not so sure that this would work out in practice given the realities in Syria, but Turkey, of course, because of the recent purge, is militarily very weak and won't be taking any initiatives in Syria. And I think this is something Putin understands. So I wouldn't see it as a lasting love match, but at the present time, there are pluses for both sides, economically primarily, for them to kiss and make up.
Mm-hmm. Phil, we're getting pretty near the end here, but I do want to ask you a general question on what you anticipate. We talked a little bit about, the CIA's position maybe 25 years ago versus today, and there's a shift in more tolerance of torture and this sort of thing. And as a non-intervention, as you say, the intervention we've been doing has been a disaster and gets worse. Can you foresee that there's any reason why we can start giving some people some hope that our side of this argument eventually may win out or at least get improvement, maybe not gradually, but as a consequence of events? What I'm thinking about is, the Soviet system, came apart, surprisingly for some people, mainly because it wasn't viable. Is there a chance that you see some positive things on the horizon where we just can't afford this anymore, and maybe we'll come to our senses?
Well, I actually think that our point of view, if not predominant, has developed legs. I think that everyone I talk to now, basically, if they're interested in voting for Trump, it's because they're hearing that part of his message. And I think that's significant. I think obviously Bernie Sanders was another type of the same message. I think people are realizing the foreign policy does not work for them anymore. The problem is getting around the two major parties that are the roadblock in terms of proceeding to the point where we can discuss this as adults and draw the appropriate conclusions, which is that an interventionist foreign policy is not productive and it doesn't serve the interests of any American.
Okay, Phil, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. It's been a delight, and we're looking forward to seeing you in our conference in September. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I want to say a word or two to our audience today and thank them for being with us today. And I want to make one point that Phil completed his our little discussion with a bit of optimism as far as I'm concerned, that that events will drive us to the point where maybe we'll come to our senses. The other thing, I talked a little bit about non-intervention, total non-intervention, the realists and the neocons. And Phil brought up the name of Sanders, and I'd put him in the progressive camp. Now, on a few things, I was able to work with Sanders in the Congress, and we try real hard to work with progressives. Sometimes the progressives on foreign policy are much better than, the typical Republican, for sure. And I think this is so important. But some progressives, unfortunately don't want to work with us because they're afraid that somebody might accept our position on free markets and sound money. And they don't want that. They want to make sure that that isn't tampered with. But I think so much of the positive relationship I have with people like Nader and Cozies, because they're progressives and they don't like intervention. So this to me is good. So I think we have to continue to do whatever we can and to spread this message. And that's why I was so delighted to have Phil Giraldi with us today on this program, because he's been at this for a long time, has had tremendous experience in the past, and we're delighted that he was with us today. I want to thank all of you for being with us today, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.